All right, well, let's go ahead and jump in and we'll allow folks to trickle in as they come. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this evening, whether you're here watching live, those of you watching the replay afterwards. My name is Tim Albrecht. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Your Financial Pharmacist, and so excited to have back again our guest, Julia Myers, who's going to be talking about Money Mastery for Parents, a Parent's Guide to Building Generational Wealth, Part 2. No worries if you missed Part 1. We're going to briefly summarize what Julia covered. We also have that on replay. You can certainly reach out to us at yfpinfo@yourfinancialpharmacist.com. We'll make sure to get you a copy of the replay if you didn't register and get that already. And just a wealth of knowledge that Julia has to share. And I'm so excited to have you in front of the group here again this evening. Let me do a brief introduction on Julia. So Julia Myers is a semi-retired pharmacist, real estate investor, and founder of Generational Wisdom. She received her doctor of pharmacy degree from the University of Wyoming, School of Pharmacy, master's in business administration from the University of Tennessee and Knoxville. Her 15-year pharmacy career encompassed clinical and leadership roles in community pharmacy, ambulatory care, health system, and specialty pharmacy. In 2020, Julia was recognized as a member of the class of 2020 under 40 by Columbia Magazine for her achievements in medication affordability, specialty pharmacy, and overall community impact. Julia medically retired from the University of Missouri Healthcare in May of 2022 and is now pursuing her best life, focusing on family, lifelong learning, and travel. She enjoys spending time outdoors, raising her 5 children with her husband, Brad. And speaking of two things, Julia, real estate investing and traveling, you're doing both of those right now on the road. So excited to see you living out your bio, if you will, which is a ton of fun. So again, thank you to those that are joining here this evening. Really excited to have Julia with us. Julia, if you want to flip to the next slide, just for some brief background on YFP for those that aren't already familiar with who we are and what we do. We help pharmacists achieve financial freedom at all stages of their career, from, hey, I'm a graduate, recent graduate, student pharmacists, all the way up to those that are transitioning in retirement. We have everything from free one-on-one resources all the way up to one-on-one fee-only financial planning and tax services. I have a team of certified financial planners and a CPA that does that work. All information on who we are and what we do, you can find at yourfinancialpharmacist.com, including upcoming webinars, of which our next one, you go to the next slide, Julia, really excited to have my partner, Tim Baker, who's going to be leading a webinar on April 17th on how to evaluate benefit packages and job offers. And he's going to be using some real life job offers to highlight some of the key things that you should be looking for. Now, we have found that whether someone's in a transitionary period or they just want to better understand their current employment benefit packages, this is really helpful information to make sure that you're optimizing what you already have available to you through your employer benefits, especially as we look at what additional coverage may or may not be needed. So Tim's going to be breaking all that down on Wednesday, April 17th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. You can go to yourfinancialpharmacist.com/offer or scan the QR code to register for that webinar. Either one of those will get you to the same place, just like we have for this evening's webinar. We hope you can be there live. If not, make sure to register and we'll send you a copy of the replay afterwards. All right, next slide, Julia. So we're going to be doing a giveaway, just like we did in part 1 of this session. We're giving away a $50 Amazon gift card. So hang with us to the end. We're going to do our best to keep this within an hour. So make sure to hang with us and I'll pull the giveaway at the end. And this is a good time to mention that this session is really for you and the questions that you have as it relates to this topic. So please use the Q&A feature, use the chat. I'll be monitoring that as we go throughout the session so we can make sure that we get your questions answered. If for whatever reason you have a question on something that Julia is providing or talking about that you don't feel comfortable talking or asking in front of a larger group, she'll provide some contact information at the end that you can reach out to her directly. You can also send us an email at info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com and we'll make sure to get you connected to Julia that way. All right, so Julia, before we pass the mic over for you to run with part 2, if you want to flip over to your learning objectives here. In part 1, you talked about some of the key money influences and how significant of a role that those can play in the money mindset and the behaviors that we have in our household, which of course is going to trickle down to how we teach our kids about money. So before we get off and running, can you just briefly summarize some of those money influences and some of the key takeaways from part 1?
Yeah, absolutely. And Tim, and thanks so much for having me back, getting to talk about parenting. Yes, I have 5 kids, and so many of these stories are shared out of love and out of the school of hard knocks. There's not a school for parenting, but we're all in this together. So the main takeaway was really about the 4 types of influences that affect your money mindset. And so as a child, you don't have as much control over them. But as you become an adult and then ultimately a parent, you have control as well as the strongest type of control or the strongest type of influence. So the 4 influences are family, the generation you were born in, the culture you were raised in. So those are maybe the intangibles, so the things that you kind of can think or that you are aware of. And then the social or social economic physical things that are around you, the neighborhood you're in, the schools you go to, the education you have. Those are 4 main types of influences. And in part 1, we really talked about how family is the strongest influence. And most parents and now most kids have their very first memories of money from their families. So listen to part 1. You as parents up-level your money mindset first, and that will get you teed up, ready to really dive into understanding and then passing on what we talk about tonight, generational wealth.
And again, if you didn't register for part 1, if you did, you would have received the replay. If you didn't, for whatever reason, just send us an email, info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com. Just in the subject, put replay part 1. We'll know what that means, and we'll get a copy of that over to you so you can catch up on that. And I remember, Julia, we asked a poll question of exactly those 4 before you were teaching about the topics, and family came out as the most significant influence of the money behaviors. And you and I were going back and forth sharing some stories of some of the key memories. And one of the things that I have found recently, Julia, is that the more I slow down to think about those experiences, the more they start to come to life and move from black and white to color. And I think that's so helpful because, as you shared and articulated so well in part 1, the more we can really understand the system in which we grew up, the money scripts that were often told in our household, maybe some of those that were helpful and maybe some of those that weren't so helpful. The more we can be aware of that, the more we can appreciate how we are approaching our money mindset individually, how we might be approaching this, especially if we're working on this with a partner or significant other spouse. And then, of course, as we talk about passing it on to the next generation. So critical, I think, that we have a good perspective on that. All right, Julie, so why don't you take over from here and take us into part 2? And I'll just remind folks again one more time, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, use the Q&A, and we'll make sure to get them answered as we go throughout.
All right. Tonight is geared towards parents and money mastery. So, as any great pharmacy presentation, we will be having 3 key objectives. Most importantly, last week we talked about mindset and we talked a lot of inner work. These objectives are super practical. You can talk about them tonight. I would not try all 3 all at once, but I would say you now have more tools in your toolbox as you move forward in your parenting journey. So most of these examples are going to be age dependent and age appropriate. For those of you with littles at home, you're going to get lots of great information. You may keep it away for a few more years. And those of you with adults, young adults, or even teenagers, you're going to be right in the weeds with me as well. So we are going to talk about healthy boundaries, healthy financial boundaries, but then alternative responses. No is great when they're 2. No is not great when they're 12 or 22. We're going to talk about ways that we can help our children really move from kind of an entitlement or a consumer mindset into more of a creation, a value, giving back kind of a mindset. We're going to get real practical with that using a discernment quadrant. Everybody loves a good quadrant. And what we're going to do is be able to pass some financial decisions or some situations through that quadrant, and then really be able to be not only self-reflective, but be able to share why we make the decisions we make as it relates to our money, as it relates to generational wealth with our family. So if you're worried about kids and money, you're not alone. So 42% of parents are worried that their kids are going to be able to manage their finances independently as adults. So that's a pretty big number. But when I got a phone call last fall, and it was a phone call from my teenager who was in her first year of college. She chose to travel all across North America. And that's what I was worried about when my phone rang. So she didn't text me, she called me. And I said, "What's going on? Do you need money?" And she was saying, I thought I did everything right. I thought that I found the best hostel. I thought that I had everything taken care of. Well, on the listing, it said laundry's included. And now I'm looking at this laundry machine and there's no laundry that's included. It's asking me for coins. Coins for laundry was not a topic that we had ever covered in any of our budgeting or expenses, because when's the last time our family had to use coin laundry? Really never, right? And so you're not alone if you're worried about some of the lessons that you can teach your kids. You will always run out of time before you will run out of lessons. So I think it's important for us to give ourselves the grace, but always to remember as parents, we can teach some things. We can teach the warmth, we can teach the love, we can teach the yes, let's stay up and read one more story. But also as parents, we have to have that more structure, the more boundaries. And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit more in the weeds of that strict structure. But I wanted just to give us all the grace and all the space to say, everyone will have that story when their phone rings on a Friday night from their college freshman. Might not be about coin laundry, but it will be about something. So we're all in this together.
Julia, can I jump in real quick? Because what touches me about that story, as maybe as simple or mundane as it may sound, coin laundry, is the vulnerability and the connection and the relationship that's there to have that conversation and to initiate it, right? I think that's sometimes we lose that, right? When we're talking about like, hey, I'm going to teach my kids about time value of money and compound interest and how to do X, Y, and Z, and all that is good, right? But beneath all of that is still that ever important foundation and connection and relationship and an openness to a conversation. And as simple as that sounds, like that to me is what really stood out in that story is that, hey, like, mom, I've got a question and I know that calling you is a safe place to have this question and I don't have to have it all figured out. Like, I love that. And so I just wanted to slow down and acknowledge and honor that because I think that's such a cool part of the story and something that we often lose when we're talking about teaching kids about money is really that importance of a foundation of a relational aspect.
Oh, well, thank you. And she did ask, is there an app for that? And I said, no, dear, there's not an app for that. And this is a phrase that we use in our household a lot, versions of it. And I want to start with that because when you think about the stories you're telling yourself about money, it's very easy to be like, someday when I'm a freshman in college, I'll have it all figured out. Or someday when I've graduated with my PharmD degree, or once I have the house, or once I have the kids, or once my trust is in place and my will is in place, we're set, right? We know that that's a myth, right? We know that choices around us aren't hard or easy. If there were easy choices, it wouldn't be a choice, right? It would just happen. But the reality is you're choosing many, many times when it comes to finances or other things in life, it's between hard and harder. And so as we shift into the first topic for this evening of the three that we're going to cover, we talk about financial maturity. And it's sometimes, well, it's hard now, or it's going to be harder later, or it's harder now so that it's less hard later, but it's not hard or easy. And I think that's really important to remember when we talk about delayed gratification. And sometimes that means you explain to your kid, you have to have your dessert after you have your regular meal. But when it comes to money, it's age appropriate to a certain extent, but we always are talking about some sort of goal setting. Having a clear vision in front of us, talking a little bit about that mindset as a family. What are our values as a family? Making sure that as a financially mature adult, we're raising financially mature, hopefully someday independent adults that are starting with, delayed gratification. Goal setting. I think budgeting sometimes gets a bad rap, but in our family, we use that phrase a lot. It's not in our budget. And we'll get into some more rebuttals of what happens when they say, well, you have plenty of budget. But I think at any age, when they're able to kind of decide between two things, that's as basic as budgeting can be. We can get as complex as we want it to be as we get into shared expenses for the teenagers and talking about as you're earning money or as you're working, you don't have enough birthdays to pay for everything that you want, especially as a teenager. And so earning money is a really important part, but also how you manage your money. And once you get paid, Or if you're paying for chores or if you're paying your kids at home, is there a clear payday? Our kids know it's payday is Friday in our house when it comes to how we hand money to the kids, whether it's digital or physical. So that teaches them delayed gratification. When they do their chores on Sunday or they do the car wash, they don't get paid right away. And that's teaching in little baby steps some of those ways of delayed gratification. Saving money goes back to the goals, goes back to the budget, and gives them that muscle that we have to practice. As soon as they get that $100 bill at Christmas time, how long does it take for them to spend it? We've talked a little bit about that before, but knowing that saving money is a really, really important step, whether you can see it, whether you can see it growing in a bank, but some sort of a measure that holds you back from spending 100% of everything that you have or that's in there. And one of the very first lessons we learn in preschool, and then we never stop learning it, is giving might look like sharing or exchanging. It's not always about you as the consumer. It's not always about you and what you can get out of something, but what can you do to exchange? And if you're able to start that giving conversation sooner, that sharing, that will make this value conversation we're going to have so, so much easier. I will also say that we won't be here forever, whether they are off in college or whether we are headed in for surgery and we're signing consent forms to say, this is what I want to happen as I'm going into surgery. Teach your kids for the day that you're not there so that they can make these decisions on their own. Many, many times as parents, we don't want it to be hard for our kids. But remember, the myth is it's hard or easy. The reality is it's harder. So sometimes our greatest intentions as parents are to make it not hard for our kids. And many of these conversations need to be hard. Many of these lessons need to be learned by failure, learned in safe ways, rather than just learned through a textbook or learned through, well, this is what my parents did, or you don't have to worry about that. So let's just give ourselves that friendly reminder that it's how our kids act when we're not around, especially when it comes to money, that we want to create an open and honest conversation, but also open and independent, mature little adults.
Julia, can I pick your brain on the earning money piece for a moment? And my kids are a little bit younger, and so I'm curious to hear your perspective on two areas and how those that are watching might handle age and some of these behaviors. So my experience with my boys has been when it comes to earning money, especially my older 2 to 3, exactly what you're saying, kind of, hey, there's a payday per week. If you wash the car on Sunday and payday's on Friday, like I think that's a really important lesson that they start to learn in terms of like, hey, when you work, you get paid every week or every 2 weeks or once a month, whatever, right? It's not instantaneously on the day. However, with my youngest and when they were younger, like I did feel like it was really important to have that instant connection between work and pay, especially at a younger age. And then obviously as they get older, they can better understand that delayed gratification. We know that young children often live in that perfect present, right? So just curious to hear your
Mhm.
perspective on that. And then also kind of the physical to the digital. So, my view is like with our older boys, obviously beginning to teach them for a digital world, that's what they're going to grow up in. They're probably not going to have a bunch of cash on hand necessarily. But when they were real young, like that physical cash was important for them to kind of understand, what that meant and to actually feel a dollar bill, right? Versus looking at a number on a screen or, looking at a number on an app. So I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on those two things of both like age and the delayed gratification as well as the digital aspect.
Yeah, I think for us, for age, we were able to kind of tackle it in two ways, especially when they were younger. Same with that kind of like being able to see it or see it instantly. And sometimes it was a coupon or a voucher because everybody in our house seems to love things from the dollar store. And so they would want a dollar. They didn't really know that the dollar meant something, but they knew that the coupon meant we get to go get something, but we know that we can't go to the store today, or whatever that situation was. And so being able to have that delayed in there, but also totally understand that when they're younger, it's much different. And to the digital and the physical, I don't know how you teach people how to carry coins when you never need coins except for coin laundry. But what I do know is that we transitioned probably at 8 or 9 to a bank account where all of the coins, all of the dollars that had been accumulated in the cute piggy banks they got when they were little or the jars, um, went into the bank, turned it in, and then they got a piece of paper. And I just remember the look on their face of, I want my coins back, not this piece of paper. And so being able to show them on their devices or on the parents' devices has been kind of fun to watch it grow and to see that their money can do different things. So for us, it was kind of that 7, 8, 9, boys and girls are a little bit different. So those are two kind of takeaways that I have when it comes to age, delayed gratification paydays, and digital versus physical.
Yeah, that's great. I had the same exact experience with I think he might have been 8 at the time. He's 12 now, but that first experience from like, hey, I had $100, right, from a birthday or holiday or something, and now we opened a bank account, and like, wait a minute, you just took my $100, and then now I can see I have $100 on a screen, but like, right, it feels like I lost that. It feels like I don't have that $100 anymore. So I think it's a great teaching moment, and I think to your, harder, like it's part of the evolution when we look at them learning those principles. So I appreciate your perspective on that.
Yep. And as we are talking with money with our kids, and sometimes we have to remind ourselves of this phrase is, really shifting your mindset. So last week we talked about the up leveling your money mindset, just kind of understanding where you came from and what influences you had. But now really owning, are you telling yourself, well, I deserve XYZ. I deserve, let's really shift it to I am responsible for. So as we talk about generational wealth, as parents, we can say, I am responsible for part of the generational wealth. I'm responsible for the lessons. I'm responsible for the discernment that we're going to talk about. And then the kids are just as responsible for their actions and their, you know, um, ownership of the dollars that they're entrusted with, or kind of the family name. I think that that's really important as we talk generational wealth, is what are the stories that are, going to continue to persist after we as parents are gone. And a quick story I've got is last Halloween when it was quite cold outside. You could smell the leaves, but it was a frigid, cold Halloween. So inside, everybody's bundled up, we're a little bit sweaty, and we're ready to go out. And the kids did one lap around the block. And normally Halloween's a really big deal. The big ones and the little ones and the cousins, and we all are that entourage of people that it's like, how many more are there as you're answering the door for Halloween? And it was the kids that surprised me so much when they said, we have enough. We're ready to go home. I said, but it was only one block. And this is the mom tax in me that always says, I want more Reese's or whatever it is that's my favorite for the week. And they said, we're good. We have enough. It's really cold. We don't want to be out anymore. And the best part is, Mom, it'll all be on sale tomorrow. We can just buy some more candy. But for tonight, we have enough. And so I just shared that because the delayed gratification also balanced with the contentment, I think is a great transition as we talk about what are those boundaries of, yes, you want more. Contentment doesn't mean you don't want more. It just means you're super thankful and grateful for what you do have. So sometimes when we say, budget is that very transactional piece of what you do with your money, sometimes boundaries are that like relational piece, that discernment piece that we have when it comes to money. And so many times when saying yes or saying no, always having that why is so, so important, because tying it back to the family values, tying it back to the family plan is going to help a child really understand why they're doing what they're doing. I have a hard time as a parent explaining why they need algebra, trigonometry, pre-calc, calc, at the same time that my littler ones are learning cursive at their school when the bigger ones didn't have to learn cursive. But when it comes to financial boundaries and it comes to family values, I can speak to that all day long. And I think that the kids, especially as they're getting older or more independent, they can articulate that too. So making sure that you as parents have had clear conversations. What are our family values? What is our financial plan? And that is why we do what we do, not just, yes, we're buying this, or no, we're not buying that. So I think the boundaries is really quite important. Practically, parents, this is hard. It takes us working on this muscle just as much as it takes the kids, because I don't know how many of you have heard, well, just buy it. You can afford it. Well, we parents, yes, we provide for needs, but you're going to pitch in for some of the wants. But at some point, they might not understand that answer. So one of my favorites are, we just want to spend it differently. We value different things, even though we can't afford it. And then what do they say? But I need it. I really, really need it. Well, is that a need or a want? And how do you help them decide, is it really what you need? Is it a Maslow's, hierarchy of needs, or is it a TikTok trend, or somewhere in the middle? And that's where this discernment quadrant's really going to come into play, is helping kids and adults decide, what do we need versus what do you want? Okay, well, mom, I really want this. Okay, it's not a need. I really want this. So what are you willing to do to earn it? What are you willing to do to earn it? Something that is really interesting is 80% of jobs today are all mental jobs. Only 20% are physically earning it. So parents, we've got to get creative. Typically, paying for chores is something physical, something manual. But 80% of jobs today, and probably a greater percentage going forward in the future, maybe there's jobs that aren't even created yet. We've got to think of ways to engage our kids to have them earn from a value creation that's not just physical labor. So I think that that is a really great way for us to give them some responsibility, but also some accountability and some life skills, rather than just, my house is clean, my car is clean, the lawn is mowed, and there's only so much you can do when it comes to earning money. So having them feel empowered to buy things and buy gifts is such an important skill that I've really liked. And then the last one, but I could never save that much. Well, 5,000 a year is about $13-ish a day. And so sometimes I'll say, how long do you have to save? There's that delayed gratification piece again. If they've never had to wait or save, this is going to feel hard. This is going to feel really uncomfortable. Sometimes I'll say, fine, you bought this, you saved for it. We will look back at the receipt, or we will look back at that purchase, or maybe even just Christmas gifts from, not even a quarter ago. And we'll say, how much value did that really give you? How much did that really bring you? And is it something you still are really glad you saved for? Or is it a lesson in, maybe you're right, I really wanted that and I got it, but I don't know if I would do that again.
Julia, can you stay on this slide just for one moment? One of the things I've enjoyed about last webinar and this one is I'm learning alongside of the group, which is a ton of fun. So for those that are live don't know, I've got four boys, 4 to 12, right? So we're just in that age where some of these pieces are starting to come together, especially with my older three. And I had never thought about, Julia, the connection of, you talk about physical chores and the disconnect from the type of work that they will be doing. It's like, yes, of course. Like, but it's like we have this old school chore, physical labor kind of habit that's been passed down, right? That's what my parents did, and that's how we earn money. But yet it doesn't apply to the type of work that they're doing. So I love that. That's got me thinking a different way. Thank you. Can you talk more about, I like your intentionality with saying we want to spend it differently, which said another way is, hey, we can afford it. We're choosing to make a different decision. And I think it's so important that we don't say what's so automatically can come out of our mouth sometimes, which is a Pavlovian response of like, we can't afford it. And why that can be detrimental when in fact you actually might be able to afford it. So can you just talk about that from a perspective, why that language is so important?
I think it has to do with regaining your power over money. When you say you can't afford it, that means you're saying either other people can and I'm not good enough, it's a value judgment, or it's I can't afford it, kind of throw my hands in the air, kind of a head in the sand approach. And practically, we all can afford it. We live in America. We are blessed in so many different ways. That doesn't mean you could afford everything. That does mean you can afford pretty much anything, depending on, how you look at it and how you leverage yourself and all those things. But
Mhm.
in general, for me, it's about not having any feelings of scarcity. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But that really can drum up, especially in kids, like either anxiety or just stress of, well, I can't afford it. I
Yeah.
can't afford it. Does that mean my parents need to work harder? Does that mean that I'm going to lose my house? And so worry from a kid's perspective can feel really big and scary.
Mhm.
And so sometimes when you say no because you can't afford it, that might genuinely be an appropriate response or answer. But I love how you said, don't let that be the default
Yeah.
response or answer.
Yeah. I love that because I think it gets to that what you were sharing of the why, right? It's not just a yes or no, but it's a why. My one of my boys loves to propose like these crazy hypotheticals. Like it's just something he's always done. And he's real big into cars, so he's real big into like fancy cars of like, so if you took all the money we had and everything you did and across all these accounts, like could we buy this car? And I remember this exact conversation with him of like, technically, the answer is yes, we could buy that car, but here are the 5 reasons why that's probably not the best decision that we would make. And so it led to a really interesting conversation about kind of, what do we value? And everyone's values, of course, are differently. And, we talked a little bit about interest and savings and depreciation, appreciation. And, I probably went on a rant that was way above the actual scenario and situation. But the point being not just a yes or no or the knee-jerk response of like, no, we can't afford this, I think really opened up a beautiful space to actually have some of the conversations of like, yes, but we want to spend it differently. And here's why. Let's talk about that. So this is great. Great stuff.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And that'll be a great April Fool's joke for him next year. And like send him a picture of it and be like, hey, here's what I got for you. April Fool's. No, I'm kidding. So where we're going to talk tonight for the rest of the time we have together is this big word called discernment. Why is discernment important? Because it is the independent ability to really be able to weigh risk and reward, risk and benefit, to be able to like decide between two things that might be both right or both good, or one's hard and one's harder. And so discernment is the main thing that I want parents to take away, is that you as parents are able to teach this behavior. You didn't just come into this world with discernment. This is something that you build over time, and it's never too late. So you can start today reflecting on some of your own decisions, some of your own interactions with your partner or your spouse, with your family, your extended family. Once you kind of get a handle on your own level of discernment and comfortability with discernment, it's then time to pull your kids in. As uncomfortable as it is to sometimes have these conversations, we're having the talk at school earlier and earlier. We should be having the talk about money earlier and earlier, but don't just give them the facts, the technical, the budget, give them the relational, those skills to discern how to then grow up and to be their own adults. So what I have come up with in the families that I've worked with are two really, continuums. So on the horizontal axis, I'm going to walk us from consumption all the way to creation. So kind of two ends of the spectrum. Again, there's not a North Star. This isn't a compass. This isn't saying across the top, there's only one direction. This is more of just a directional number to know where you might land when it comes to a certain decision or comes to a certain assessment or approach. And then is that the direction you want it to be in? And if not, let's move it down these hash marks one way or the other. And then vertically, we're going to talk about some of those decisions that we make out of scarcity, all the way going up to abundance. There's a big difference, right? And many of us that are just seeing this for the first time might be like, wow, I've never even thought about it this way. I'm putting a financial lens on it. However, this can apply to a lot of other things when it comes to wealth. When I think of wealth, I think more than just monetary richness. I think of health. I think of connection. I think of relationships. And this can apply to those other things as well. So more to come when it comes to this discernment quadrant. Tonight, we're just putting a financial lens on it. So what we're going to do is insert some of those hash marks. So again, starting with that horizontal axis, we're going to go consumption. So kind of, I am the consumer. I am not necessarily doing anything other than just being a human, right? Like that's part of the society and the culture that we live in. But being a consumer may look like the next generation getting new devices and new screens very, very regularly. It may not look like the boomer generation where they were recycling and reusing butter dishes in their kitchens. And so just knowing that that consumption may look different from generation to generation, from family to family. I shift over to the right on that horizontal line over to capitalism. And I want capitalism to be a kind word, not a political word, not a government word, but we are doing something that somebody else wants, that they will pay us for in exchange for that value that we've created. And so as we shift from that consumption over to that creation, we start to think about things in a different way. We start to think about us as part of a larger piece, whether it's the family and it's that generational wealth that we're creating that often comes from capitalism or businesses or revenue and income. It is in strict opposition with just consuming. You can't have generational wealth if we only sit on that consumption side of the line. Like inflation alone will just eat us alive. And I see Tim, you're like, yep. Don't look at your stocks this week. It wasn't so great. And then vertically, as we have discernment and as we have decisions, when you're operating from a place of scarcity, like it's really hard to think about anything else. It's really hard. It's quite stressful. So as we move up that hash mark and from scarcity to maybe we're just sufficiency, we're just making it, we're just getting by. But is that where we want to be for the long haul? Then we might just be satisfied. How are things? When my kids use that 4-letter word, it's called fine. I know that's not real, right? Fine, fine. That's a 4-letter word in our house. Are you able to describe more about what you're feeling and where you're at? Because if you're just fine, you're satisfied, but I know there's so much more for you and your potential as a young person. Okay, so maybe I'm satisfied, right? Let's move up to content. Content we talked about earlier. It's not saying that you don't want more. It's just maybe being thankful for what you do have. Now we're moving up that spectrum into fulfillment, really feeling full, really feeling like our cup is at that brim and we are full. Again, that feels a little bit different to me than contentment. Different people may define it differently, but in the work that I've done, this is what I found. And at the very top of that kind of quadrant is abundance. Your cup is overflowing, so much so that you can pour into other people. You can pour into your family. You can pour into lots of other things. So what that might look like is a lot of words, but what I want you to do though is also say, this is the practical application of it when we insert the emotions that go with it. So I'm going to throw in 4 different emotions, and then Tim, I'm going to let you pause and get some reflections. So how many of us have felt down in that lower left quadrant, that consumption, that scarcity? To me, that feels like anxiety. That feels like I am paycheck to paycheck. I have a PharmD degree. I have a lot of debt because I have a mortgage and I have a car payment and I have this, and I just am not sure what end is up. To me, that feels like anxiety. And thankfully, that's not where we always have to be. So we talked a little bit about mindset last week, but knowing that as you shift from that consumption over to creation, as you shift from scarcity to abundance, that's how we can get out of it. So just too much for tonight to talk specifically those tips of how to do that. But what I can say is that it's possible. I will also, moving to the top left, talk about gratitude. It's okay to be a consumer and to be thankful for what you have and to have plenty of it. The example I use is travel. That's kind of a consumption mentality. That's something that's a huge family value for us. And I have so much gratitude for that. And it feels fun and abundant for me when I can then share those experiences with my kids. Moving over to the bottom right, when I think of scarcity and I think of capitalism together, I picture, and this might throw you back, Tim, Scrooge McDuck. I picture that very afraid, very crotchety, very penny pincher. I don't have enough, but I am invested in everything. I've done everything right. I have this capitalist mindset, and I'm afraid. I can't get out of, will I have enough? I think of this as kind of that kind of middle class horizon line. And when I think of middle class and below, I think of that consumption, scarcity, capitalism arm. And as we shift up above that horizon line, and we can have gratitude, abundance, and ultimately wisdom is a directional place where we're creating value. We are full, we are abundant. That is what I think of when I think of a wealthy mindset. And when I think of generational wealth, I want the decisions I'm making above that line. That's the horizon line. Even better if we can balance them between the top left quadrant and the top right quadrant. I'll pause there. I see you thinking, what are your thoughts? And I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat as well. What stands out to you? What emotion stands out to you? What do you want to know more about?
Yeah, this is beautiful, Julia. And while folks are potentially chatting in, what's coming to mind to me is when you talked about for your family travel, right? Upper left-hand corner. For us, it's experiences. And we're kind of a homebody family for the most part, but it's about those experiences together where, as rational as we'll be in every financial decision, there's a place where we say, okay, we're going to plan for this, and we're intentionally going to splurge because of the experience, because of the time together. So, for boys, sometimes that's big sporting events. We've done concerts together, other things that, maybe outside the bounds of a normal budget, but uh, are very clearly intentional decisions. And when I think back to like some of the core memories, like for us, it's the experiences. So I'm so glad you highlighted like consumption doesn't equal bad, right? What I really hear there is it's intentional consumption, and it's the mindset around that. I often share that for me and my own financial journey, I certainly can be a saver. I don't mind spending money, and in fact, I enjoy spending money when it's intentionally planned for and allocated for a specific goal or purpose. Um, Vacations, travel, experiences, those types of things. And really having, for me, kind of the structure around the planning for it is so important. So that really jumped off the page to me. The other thing is, we often talk about when it comes to the financial plan, we have to find this balance between saving for the future, right? Taking care of our future selves and living a rich life today. Like there has to be some level of balance of this. And we often work with pharmacists that might be on, either end of that spectrum where it's, consumption heavy, or, just some of the natural pressures that come with, student loan debt and buying a home and raising a young family and all those things where, there's most of the time and money being spent today, and we're doing it at the expense of the future. However, we've also worked with many pharmacists, and when we actually get into the numbers and look at them, like we're perhaps over saving, and there's I don't know, miserable might be too strong of a word, but there's fear that's driving this. There's a scarcity mindset around kind of this hyper over aggressive saving and not being able to let the hands off, at all in terms of today and the plan. And so I think the emotional aspects here are so important. We spend so much time on the X's and O's, which are so important, but it's these emotions that really lay behind the financial plan and the decisions that we make. And the more that we're aware of them, the better informed we can be in the decisions that we're making. So this is awesome. This is really cool. And I think, for me, it's coming to life of a lot of the things that we talk about in terms of striking that balance. You're putting different words to it, different emotions to it, as well, which is important. Um, Katie put something in the chat here, Julia. So thank you, Katie. I'm working on my mindset with my middle 9-year-old. He loves to buy. Welcome to the club, Katie. I have a 9-year-old. He's the same. Gift money burns a hole in his pocket. We've tried a gratitude journal for a while to focus, highlight contentment without much success. Would love to hear some concrete strategies to help out the mindset shift for a 9-year-old shopper. Katie, I love that question. I'm gonna let Julia chime in here, but my 9-year-old, I always joke because his aunt and uncle sent him a Target gift card on his birthday. And it's like, man, the second that envelope's open, it's like, when are we going to the Target store? Right? It's like boom, boom. So Julia, what are your thoughts on this?
For us, I lean into giving. I lean into a little bit of, yes, that's yours, but is it really yours? We use the word stewardship. We're a faith-based household. And so sometimes it's you've been entrusted with that, And I will challenge them to think bigger. I will challenge them to think beyond that instant gratification, which is so hard. If it's hard at 9, it gets harder at 13, 17, and 20. And my 8-year-old's kind of already there. So you are not alone, Katie, for sure. For us, it's stewardship of, you can spend some of it, but you can't spend all of it. And if that means that when you get your paycheck electronically deposited, like one of mine, that means that we've had that conversation that I can't help my spending and I just need half of it transferred out, but I want you to tell me you're transferring it. So it's not just expecting them to do it all on their own, because that's not maybe a muscle they've ever had. We just crossed the $1,000 saved, and they are so thankful that they have that $1,000, because it's like, I don't know that I have anything to show for it on the other side. Another practical tip is pulling up past purchases or past receipts of, do you realize what you purchased, and does that still bring you that same value or that same joy? Or is it the thrift of the shopping that you really liked? And if so, let's see if we can find that shopping maybe for somebody else. I do lots of volunteering in the foster system. And that might mean buying some blankets or some pillows for a kiddo that can't go home tonight. Would you like to spend your money in that way? Absolutely, we can go to Target. Absolutely, we can go shopping. It's just not for you. It's for somebody else. And how do you feel about that? So those might be 2 examples that I would share that we've tried to kind of balance that instant gratification along with, the giving / stewardship angle.
Yeah, that's really good, Joey. A couple of other things that are coming to mind, Katie, for me. And again, full disclaimer is um, money will still burn a hole in his pocket. So it's very much a work in progress. But I've really been trying to teach them the 24-hour rule, on purchases, which is something we often talk about in the household. If there's something that's significant, obviously that's subjective what you call that. But, if we're thinking about a new, I don't know, TV or stereo or something, let's just take at least 24 hours, maybe longer, and kind of take a step back and just give it some space. How do we feel about that a day later, right? Just giving some perspective. I found that helpful. Doesn't always work, but I found it helpful. And then the other thing I found helpful with my 9-year-old is really trying to encourage him to set a goal of something that perhaps may be bigger and is longer term horizon, and something that has more delayed gratification. Now, granted, he has a couple older brothers that I think he can see them like implementing more of that delayed gratification. And then he sees that, oh, they got something they really wanted, and it wasn't that dollar store toy that's in the trash, the next day type of a thing. Um, so that helps. But I think that bigger goal is helping with some of that delayed gratification. Again, at times, not always, certainly.
And last thing I'll add is, at 9, matching funds don't mean a whole lot. But when they're 12, 13, 14, and they have a much bigger goal, like I need to pay for my gas, or I need to pay for part of my phone bill, or I need to pay for, activities with my friends, matching funds is something that we've found to be really a great incentive. So it's almost like they're getting paid double if they save it rather than if they spent it.
Mhm.
Great question. So I'll share a story as we kind of close up our time tonight, kind of evaluating these decisions. And so there was a huge purchase that I made this summer. And if anybody else is a Taylor Swift fan, you know where this story is going. Huge fan. I was lucky enough to be able to score some tickets. So when I put that purchase and everything that it entailed, it meant taking myself, my oldest daughter, my sister-in-law. That's 5 of us. We had 6 tickets, but that's 5 of us that went. So my alignment with my values was, we're going to Kansas City. We got a very cool Airbnb, and I was nicknamed the capitalist philanthropist for the entire trip. And that's kind of what spurred some of this conversation, was like, how did you get these tickets? How did you get this Airbnb? How did you pay for this for us to have this amazing girl trip experience? And I said, well, 1, it aligns with my values. 2, it's a healthy motivation. It's family time together. It's kind of travel, it's Kansas City, but Tim, to your point, it's the experience that we are going to remember that forever. And the third and best part was included in the financial plan. So I was able to resell ticket number 6 and pay for everything. So not everybody would love to hear that that's how I kind of ended up doing it, but it's what worked and it's what made me feel abundant. It made me feel like I was being frugal with the third row bleeder nose seats that we had and being able to sell one and just be able to share that whole experience of, yes, we went to a concert. Yes, we feel abundant. And yes, I feel that it was a wise decision. Will I resell any future tickets I get? Oh, we'll see. Jury's out on that one. But for us, that was what I'm going to call generational wealth, was that experience with my sisters, with my oldest daughter, and being able to put our money to good use, but also be intentional because it aligned with our values. So that's a story I wanted to share and say, Tim, I know you had a couple big decisions you were maybe wanting to walk through this discernment quadrant. Maybe it comes to education, maybe it comes to vehicles or houses or real estate. What do you want to put through this? And I'm putting you in the hot seat now and
Well, this is good
talk
because
through it.
one of the things that I see a lot, Julia, number 3 is that this is why we're such big advocates for creating savings buckets and having a name for the bucket. Now, if you get to a point of financial wealth and financial independence, that obviously may not be necessary after a time. I would argue, Julia, probably because of the hard work that you guys have done, regardless of you sell that 6 ticket, like it's not going to rock the boat on your financial plan, right? So you're still able to look at what's the values, what's the motivation to make a decision about what you want to do and what's the value of that experience. But if we can really define a goal, whether that be the Taylor Swift concert, whether that be, a trip to Italy, whether that be insert anything that we're trying to work for on the, we're talking about remodel on our basement. We're weighing that against kind of the next car purchase. We're weighing that against kids' college, right? These are all these competing priorities. And what we feel like is so important that I think aligns with what you're talking about here and really putting that quadrant is getting these out of our head onto paper and really starting to move these around to figure out how do these fit in with our values? What is the motivation behind the decision? Does this make sense in the context of the financial plan? And in what priority and order might we do these? And it's not always the objective financial move, right? This is such an important point that, as a type A spreadsheet nerd, like if you're always making the decision that's going to have the greatest return on your investment, we're probably not going to strike that balance I was talking a little bit about before. So we've got to really do that work to put in a strong financial foundation and then really take a step back to say, okay, these other decisions, maybe we're spending money on a Taylor Swift concert, maybe we're spending money on a trip or doing these other things. Sure, could you put that money in, an S&P 500 and brokerage account and let it ride for 20 years? Of course, right? But if we look at every decision in that way, we're going to be paralyzed with giving, we're going to be paralyzed with experiences and other things that we've talked about that are of great value. So we have found with many of the clients that we work with, that if we can put a bucket and a name to it, which thankfully in banking in 2024, you can do pretty easily. If not, you can create a spreadsheet. Taylor Swift concert, call it the bucket, put a name on it, save for it. Future car purchase, remodel on the home, adding a deck, whatever are the things that you're doing. Because what we see is when we then go to spend that money, it feels different. We can do it with confidence because we've thought about it, we've planned for it, and we can really enjoy the richness of whatever that expense is and really reflect on the progress that we've made and the goal that we're ultimately achieving. I think where a lot of regret and sometimes shame comes from is when we haven't planned for it, we haven't thought about it, and then we're in that experience and hopefully enjoying it. But then we're, maybe kind of kicking ourselves of like, oh, I shouldn't have done that because, we're behind on this, or we haven't done this, or we haven't done this, whatever it might be. And whether those things are real or not, that stress and anxiety and fear becomes very real, right? The perception of it regardless. And so, again, the system I think is really important. And I like the framework of what you've done here because I think it helps what we often talk about with buckets and put them into the context of the quadrants, and then think about in what priority might you save them. So I use the
And there's
basement.
hard and harder. You've got two competing
That's
priorities.
right.
It's not that one's bad. It's now or later, like both are
Yeah,
okay.
that's right. Yeah, and I'll be brief here because I know we're running out of time, but we've been talking about for years finishing our basement. As I mentioned before, we're homebodies. We love that time together, watching football, movies, whatever. Like those are some core memories for our family. And we're honestly like going back and forth on this decision right now. Everything from like, hey, this is very much a part of living the rich life to are there maybe some other things that we might want to kind of shore up and kind of put a bow around so that when we actually move to this stage, we can do it with even a greater sense of confidence and peace of mind. Now, I also know myself well enough that like I can continue to punt that decision and rationalize all the other things that have to get done, when in fact they don't necessarily have to get done, right? So there's a balance of that as well. But that's something that we're kind of working through in real time.
Got it. And I'll hit on number two a little bit on that basement decision. Is it sounds like you have a healthy motivation. Sometimes procrastination just means delaying making a decision that you know you're going to make.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're still collecting data points and you're still discerning or deciding, do I need more information? Does that change the outcome? That's not procrastination. That's just a healthy reflection and good decision making.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not hearing motivation of my neighbors finished their basement and they have a really cool man cave, so I want one.
Mm-hmm.
Or my kids say they had a sleepover and they had this really cool bunkhouse, and so I want to have that. To me, that's kind of that like competition, cultural, generational, social influence. It's less about what are your core influences. And
Yeah.
so I'm not hearing any of that. So I'm hearing that whatever the decision is, you can kind of free yourself from that pressure of
Mm-hmm.
making the wrong decision, because it sounds like they're all the right decision.
Yeah, and I really like that first point too, Julia. It reminded me of in Ramit Sethi's book, I'll Teach You to Be Rich. I think it's the first chapter. He talks about the concept of money dials and like really identifying, I think I see values of having some similar connection to that. Like really taking a step back to say, like, are we actually spending money on the things that we truly care about and not spending money on the things that we don't actually care about? And as obvious as that sounds, I think just culturally that can be so difficult to really evaluate like what do we truly care about and not care about and not what others may care about or not care about. And the concept he's using with that money dial is like find those things that you truly derive value from, and like let's figure out in the plan like how do we prioritize it, how do we dial that up, and if we find that we're spending money on things that we don't actually care about, like let's figure out a way to dial that down, right, so that we can have the balance between those. So I like that alignment with values piece as well. I know
And
we got
that
it.
just generational wealth in general, you're going to be able to maintain it, putting decisions, especially financial decisions, kind of through this lens.
Mm-hmm.
So just that's the key takeaway, is that the generational wealth, don't be the statistic. Don't be the family that doesn't talk about money. Talk about money, talk about values, talk about motivation.
Mm.
If you want to know more, I created a little handout. So you can scan this QR code. You can grab this Google Drive link that will be in the summary replay. And if you want to know more or continue this conversation, you can find me online. I am super happy to partner with YFP and so honored to have been able to share some hours with you guys. And I would love to stay connected and continue the conversation.
Awesome. This has been a ton of fun, Julie. Thank you for giving up a couple hours of time and preparation and all that goes involved. I know I've got a ton out of it, and I know our community as well. So thank you to you for your investment of time and your passion for teaching. You definitely have the heart of a teacher, and I love that. Just as a couple reminders, again, next webinar is coming up on April 17th on evaluating employer offers and benefit packages. You can get to that through yourfinancialpharmacist.com/offer, as well as the QR code. At any point, you can go to the website and we have a page where upcoming webinars are located. So just know that that's there as a regular resource. And finally, last but not least, our giveaway winner is Raylene Trudeau. So Raylene, I'll reach out to you so we can coordinate getting your Amazon gift card. So thanks for hanging to the end. Any last minute questions before we wrap up here? All right. Well, seeing none, Julia, thank you again so much for your time, and those that were able to attend live here as well. Thank you for giving up time on a Thursday evening. Have a good night, everyone. Take care.
Night.